Welcome to Tech Blueprint, a window that lets you know the latest technology news in the world. The Nexperia incident has been trending on major Chinese social media platforms lately. The story begins with the Netherlands forcibly seizing Nexperia's Dutch headquarters from a Chinese company, citing national security as a pretext. While it's called a takeover, it's hardly a robbery. The semiconductor company, acquired for 33.4 billion renminbi, saw its assets frozen overnight, followed by the dismissal of senior executives and the placement of equity in trust. The company's actual control was forced to change so quickly that China barely had time to react. The Dutch government initially thought they could easily acquire Nexperia for free. However, they never anticipated that they would only seize the Dutch headquarters, a mere office, while the core production capacity, supply chain, and customers remained in the hands of Nexperia China. This seemingly meticulously planned power grab has now devolved into a farce. European automakers exerted increasing pressure, forcing the Netherlands to seek negotiations with China. However, Chinese companies calmly announced they would resume chip supplies, but only to domestic customers, requiring settlement in RMB. Who was ultimately tricked in this game? When the lifeline of the industrial chain lies in China's hands, how long can those tactics, disguised as national security, but secretly intended to contain China, continue? On September 30, 2025, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy suddenly issued a ministerial order against Nexperia, freezing all assets, intellectual property, business operations, and personnel adjustment rights of 30 entities worldwide for 1 year. Just 1 day later, Nexperia's chief legal officer, along with its chief financial officer and chief operating officer, filed an emergency application with the Dutch Corporate Court. That same afternoon, a ruling was received. Chinese CEO Zhong Shuozheng's duties were suspended, and Nexperia shares were placed under the trusteeship of an independent third party. This efficiency is absurdly high in Europe. The complaint was filed in the morning, and a provisional judgment was issued in the afternoon. Without even giving the defendant time to prepare evidence, the incident was unilaterally defined by the Dutch side. Zhong Shuozheng's email, communication systems, and internal accounts were all blocked. Wingitech Technology received over 500 pages of lawsuit materials, yet had only 2 business days to prepare a response. Even more coincidentally, the day before the Dutch took action, the US tightened its controls on China. It added a 50% penetration rule to the entity list and included Nexperia within its regulatory scope. This means that going forward, any company with a Chinese shareholder holding over 50% will be added to the US's so-called entity list. Add to that the previous revelations in the Dutch court that the US had pressured the Netherlands to replace Nexperia's Chinese management. The coincidence of the current Nexperia incident raises doubts about the independence of this decision. The Dutch government thought they had calculated things shrewdly. They believed that by controlling Nexperia's headquarters, board of directors, and legal structure, they could control the company's lifeblood. After all, Nexperia's intellectual property and patents were held in a third-party trust and then licensed to Wingitech Technology. Raw material wafer fabs were maintained in Hamburg, Germany, and Manchester, UK, while the Chinese factory was solely responsible for packaging and testing. All payments were made in US dollars, with the receipt account held in a Dutch bank. The design appeared foolproof. Wafer manufacturing took place in Europe, followed by dicing and shipment to factories in China and Malaysia for packaging and testing, before shipment to foreign companies. But the Dutch never imagined that they had snatched up a mere shell that Nexperia China could readily replace. First, Nexperia Semiconductor's technological threshold was not as high as one might imagine. It produced not high-end 5 nanometers or 7 nanometers chips, but rather power devices, small signal components, and discrete diodes using a 40 nanometers or higher process. These products are readily manufactured by many domestic foundries. Nexperia's 40% global market share stems from its low cost, stability, and the customer loyalty generated by the long chip product certification cycle. Over 70% of Nexperia's production capacity is concentrated in its factories in Dongguan, China, and Lingang, Shanghai. The crucial packaging and testing phase of chip production also relies on Chinese factories. Faced with the Dutch's aggressive stance, Nexperia Semiconductor China finally spoke out. After a 19-day supply halt, Nexperia China announced the resumption of supply. However, two key restrictions directly thwarted the Dutch government's plans: products would only be sold domestically, and only in RMB. This move, a textbook example of precise cutting, not only leaves room for future negotiations, but also provides market support for maintaining the stability of its own business. Resuming supply to the Chinese market is intended to stabilize the domestic supply chain. After all, the Chinese market accounts for over 40% of Nexperia's revenue. This allows domestic automakers to resume normal production without having to worry about the overseas market. This is a clear message to the Dutch government: you may have seized control of Nexperia's headquarters, but your say is not final, as the production capacity and market are in China. Ansha China also issued a statement regarding this, stating that, under Chinese law, the Dutch headquarters' decision to dismiss Chinese executives has no legal effect in China. This legal distinction has been drawn between Ansha China and its parent company, and Ansha China's production and operations will now adhere to Chinese rules. Previously, Ansha China conducted transactions in US dollars, but this time it has switched directly to RMB. This eliminates the risk of exchange rate fluctuations and the constraints of the US dollar clearing system. This is also a significant convenience for domestic companies and promotes the internationalization of the RMB. When the lifeline of the industrial chain is in China's hands, those self-righteous claims of technological hegemony are nothing but a joke. The dust has settled on the Ansha incident, and it is destined to become a classic footnote in the Sino-Western game. What are your thoughts on this? Feel free to leave a comment and discuss.